We are live on our Facebook page. Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to welcome you to our eighth Youth and Diplomacy Talks. I'm Ramiz Bakhtiar. I'm one of the founders of the network of former youth delegates to the United Nations. In 2018 and 19, I was selected as the first Afghan youth representative to the United Nations. I'm also a One Young World ambassador. In August 2020, after a global consultation process with over 100 former and current youth delegates from 40 plus countries, we established this network with a purpose to unite and mobilize young leaders from across the world to work together and contribute to the change that we as young people want to see in the world. During my mandate, and mainly after my mandate as a youth representative to the United Nations, we realized that there was lack of a platform or a mechanism for acting and former UNU delegates to work together to continue their activism and stay connected. So our friendships after our mandates at the UN remain largely only on social media. So we realized that that was a gap, and as a result of which a huge potential was lost. So we decided to establish this network. The purpose of Youth and Diplomacy Project is a series of talks between former and current UNU delegates, young leaders with a passion in diplomacy, and former and present UN ambassadors. The purpose of the talks is fostering the rule of the United Nations and promoting meaningful inclusion of youth in decision-making processes in line with the United Nations Youth Strategy that underpins the role of young people as partners in achieving global sustainable development, peace and security, and international human rights. Welcome everyone to our talk. Ambassador, welcome to our talk. We have two guest speakers in our today's talks. Ambassador Martin Herman, the permanent representative of Denmark to the United Nations, and my fellow UNU delegate and friend, Natasha Skjalgaard. Natasha was the former youth delegate to the United Nations for Denmark in 2018-19. She's now the Global Youth Advisor at the Danish MFA. Our guest speaker for this session, as I mentioned before, is Ambassador Martin Herman, the permanent representative of Denmark to the United Nations. Ambassador Herman has assumed this role since 2019. Before this, he was the State Secretary for Development Policy at the Danish MFA and Denmark's ambassador for Indonesia. He will tell us more about his career in diplomacy, mainly at the United Nations. Ambassador, again, welcome to our talk. In today's program, we have three segments. We will start with an opening remarks where Ambassador will tell us about his journey into the world of diplomacy and what it means to be exercising diplomacy at the United Nations, mainly during some of the most difficult times for the global community. What are some of the key learnings from his career and work at the UN that he would like to share with young leaders? And what are his country's priorities at the United Nations, and how does his country include young leaders in the decision-making processes at all levels? And then the second segment will be a moderated panel discussion. And at the end, we will have a 30 minutes open Q&A where you can ask your questions to Ambassador. If you have questions, please feel free to send your questions in chat. Those who are watching us live on our Facebook page, please feel free to leave your questions in the comment and we will ask your questions to Ambassador Herman. Ambassador, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Ramiz. Thanks for convening us. And I just saw in the chat that there are more people in the virtual meeting room that you have to let in. No? We want as many people engaged in this conversation as possible, because I really want this to be an interaction. Therefore, I'm not going to be going to be an unusual diplomat. I'm not going to be speaking at length about myself. No? But Ramiz asked me to say a little bit about my own career and how I got into diplomacy. What was my journey? And I'll be honest and say I just stumbled into diplomacy. No, it was an accident actually. It was not what I was meant to be doing. No, quite honestly, after having done a stint as a junior professional officer with the UN many years ago, 25 years ago, I came back to Denmark actually determined not to to continue work in the international arena. And I applied for a number of jobs, but actually nobody called me for an interview. So in the end, I gave up and I applied for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I thought they would take me, and they did. And here I am, some 25 years later. So it was actually, I ended up in diplomacy by accident or by natural selection. Nobody else wanted me. So this is why I'm here, and I suppose that tells a lot about my career. Actually, is about being a little bit opportunistic and seeing where opportunities arise, where I thought there would be interesting things to do. This journey has taken me to Nepal during some interesting times. It's taken me to Bhutan. It's taken me to Indonesia, and now finally here in New York. And you asked me to talk a little bit about the UN also, and I'm happy to do that. But I really want to say that one of the things that I bring with me to this job and I find most important is the fact that I've actually spent several years not in the field as such, but out in the world. And I think this is really, really important for diplomats working at the UN here in New York, that you have a sense of the world, that you actually have lived it, that you have actually experienced it. So to all of those sort of young diplomats in Spain that want to spend time at UN here in New York or in Geneva or at any of the other UN headquarters, I'd really encourage you to go out and see the world first. Because I think it's so important that we bring not only the perspectives of our own governments and of our own countries to the work we do here, but also have a better understanding that actually somewhere else in the world you might see challenges and opportunities from a slightly different perspective than what we would have as Danes. So I'd like to think that I bring with me, of course, a very, very clear understanding of my government's policies, because those are the ones I'm here to represent. My government and country's interests, those I'm here to fight for, but actually also a natural, if not a natural, then an acquired appreciation for the views and understanding of others, because I think that's really, really important if we are to have any chance of tackling what I think is mounting challenges in the world, and mounting challenges that can actually only be solved if we work together. Now, a number of the problems that we are at least talking about here in New York are problems that, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, about the time when you were born, were not necessarily considered to be sort of, at least in the wider public view, considered to be global challenges. They might be local problems, no? I mean, environmental challenges or health challenges or things like that. But these things have grown, no, both in size and complexity, and have now become global challenges, no? And for that, if we are to resolve these challenges, then we really need to work together. And the best premise for working together is appreciating that we might see things differently. That goes sort of across borders, across countries, but I actually also to some extent think it goes across generations now. And that brings me to what I think is really important, and this is why I really commend you, Ramiz, for bringing existing and former youth delegates together. I think it's this thing about generations also talking to each other, because the reality, of course, is your generation will have different perspectives of some of today's challenges than I do. But we are both going to be needed if we want to resolve them, and we need as many different perspectives as possible to foster, if you like, the kind of ingenuity, the kind of creativity, the kind of will to act, and the capacity to do so. We need to work across not only borders, but actually across generation. So it's for that, to some extent, you could say that's for that simple reason that the question of meaningful youth engagement has been a political priority for Denmark for years now. You know, some 5-6 years ago, when we did a development and humanitarian action strategy, which was called the World 2030, the then foreign minister, who was the politician responsible for developing it, he actually talked about that there needed to be a goal number 18 amongst the SDGs, and it was youth involvement, because that only by working with youth, only by engaging youth, will we be able to solve some of the challenges, reach the targets of the Sustainable the Sustainable Development Goals. So for us, it's been policy for a long time, both because we think it's right, but also because we think it's smart. We're not going to get to where we want to go unless we bring your generation along, and unless you, when you step into our sort of generational shoes, you bring the next generation along. And so for us, it's as much a perspective on partnerships across borders, across generations, and you could say also across sectors. No? So just like we are insisting that the challenges of the world are not to be solved by governments alone. They need to work with civil society. They need to work with private sector. They need to work with academia. So do we think it's important to take each other's hands across generation. Now, how do we do that? Extremely difficult. And the reality, of course, is there is plenty of what you might call tokenism at the UN. Let's have an event, and please, somebody remember to find a token youth speaker that can bring a youth perspective to our discussions, because then we can tick the youth involvement box. No? Now, I'll be honest and say I think that's a real challenge. It's not only a challenge for youth, it's also a challenge when it comes to civil society, when it comes to academia. How do you alter and change the way that intergovernmental conversation is had? That's not a thing you can do overnight. It takes consistent effort and consistent work, but I think we are getting somewhere now. So we are moving from, let's say, let's have youth sessions to more having youth engaged as an integral part of the conversation. Now, we're not quite there where youth is an integral part of decision making, but I think we are definitely moving in the right direction. You can definitely count on Denmark to continue to try and push this envelope. I think our strategy is a little bit, we will take one step, and once everybody, not everybody, but a number of countries catches up, you will see us take another step forward, gently bringing everybody along. Now, I think there's also within the UN system a recognition that you need to work on matters related to youth and meaningful youth engagement. You all know Jai Atma, who's done an amazing job as UN Youth Envoy. But I think you will also all have noticed that in the Secretary General's report on our common agenda, he's actually suggested that we need to elevate, if you like, the office of the UN Youth Envoy into a much more prominent position. We need to strengthen youth role in intergovernmental discussions in actually solving the challenges of the world. And so I think there is you have a Secretary General who appreciates the need to bring your generation not only into the discussions but actually also into implementation. And I think that's actually quite critical that's done. We need your voices to continue to hold member states to account. I think the first informal debate on the common agenda took place yesterday, or started yesterday, and one of the most prominent interventions was from a sizable group of countries, Denmark one of them, that came out with a resounding support for stronger youth engagement, for strong support for that part of the Secretary General's recommendations in our common agenda report. So you could say that over the last, and you've been part of this, over the last 5 to 10 years, youth engagement has gone from being a niche viewpoint to actually being mainstream. So we're definitely on the right course, and thankfully so. My hope would be that we can work together to further accelerate. We will definitely do what we can. In a couple of weeks, we have the Commission on the Status of Women coming up. We will have a very, very small delegation, unlike in normal years because of COVID-19, but we will have youth delegates involved as our delegation, just as we will have civil society involvement. We think it's crucial that conversations and discussions around solving the challenges of today is not something that governments alone have. I'll stop there, Ramesh. Look forward to a conversation and answering questions. Just to say, there is no taboo. No? I might not be able to answer everything, but you can ask me anything.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks. I do agree with you in regards to tokenism and the challenge for young people to push through the change that they think is important and needed. As a youth activist, I've experienced it, and I think my fellow youth delegates and other participants as young leaders would, I hope, agree with that, because we work on the ground, and we see that, but there are also opportunities and there are also hopes for a better future. Our second guest speaker is Natasha Skelgaard, who is a former UNU delegate of Denmark and now a Danish and now a global youth advisor at the Danish MFA. A lot of, I would say, a majority of UNU delegates do not end up, as my colleague Isma mentioned, to be working for the foreign service of their countries. So after their mandate, they go back to where they came from, or get jobs and work for different companies, or they initiate their own project. We're happy to have Natasha here today. Natasha will tell us about her own personal experience as a UNU delegate. How was your journey? And now that you're working around the world with young people and youth-led organizations, what are some best advocacy models for young people to have their voices heard, both at the bottom level and at the top level? Natasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ramiz, and also thank you for the tough questions on how to engage young people from all over the world. And also thank you, Martin, for bringing your perspective from the very beginning, because I can say I'm actually the quite opposite in terms of I like to think so, that I didn't stumble into the MFA. I think I was lucky enough to know quite early on, from an early age, that I really wanted to do something international. And I have always in I've always leaned towards institutions. I think the global cooperation from the multilateral institutions, also coming from Denmark, the EU, I mean, I think this, the global meeting rooms is really where things can happen in terms of agreements and cooperation. So that's something I've always been interested in. And, starting university, I started studying law, quickly figured out that, if there's anything that's super nationally oriented, it's law. But then there's also international topics at law school that actually opened my eyes. And I mean, I think in terms of how I ended up where I am, I mean, I've done a lot of volunteer work next to studying. I'm a scout. That has been my entry point to a lot of things on European level, on global level, working with how to do external relations from a youth perspective, how to work with institutions, the Council of Europe, the UN, the EU, the OSCE, you name it. How do we bring about the aspect of actually meaningfully engaging young people in decision-making processes, in policy processes, in budget processes? I mean, there's so many aspects in this that are relevant. But I've always been quite aware of how could I kind of connect all the things I did. So yes, I studied law. That was maybe not like the best choice in terms of going internationally, but then I found the international courses, human rights, diplomatic law, international humanitarian law. Then my volunteer work, I managed to push it into, European, more internationally focused, started from local level scouting, but then eventually found out how to, engage on a bigger level, on a more strategic level, on an advocacy level. And, I think what's also important to me, I mean, I didn't get in on the first try. I was an intern at the UN mission in Geneva. That wasn't, I mean, I applied several places to get an internship, got rejected several times, but then got an internship. I also applied to become a student assistant in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, didn't get it. applied to become, the entry-level position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I didn't get it the first time around. I got it the second time around. So I think that's also an advice from my side. I mean, be aware of what you're doing in terms of your interests, in terms of your hobbies, your activism. It's a really, really strong platform for you to act on. It brings you a lot of valuable experience, and you know this. But also in the sense that if it doesn't really succeed the first time around, try again. That you evolve and you keep developing, you get more skills, you get more experience, and you learn how to phrase your, part of this is also knowing how to present your experience. How do you bring in your experience from your activism, from your studies, from your volunteer work? How do you make that relevant for the UN, for example, if that's where you want to go, or the MFA, or as a UN youth delegate? So bring about that perspective. But I would say definitely being a UN youth delegate gave me a good platform. I mean, it gave me a strong platform in working with the Danish MFA. I mean, the Danish program is structured in the way that it's organized by the Danish National Youth Council, but funded via the MFA. So there's very, very close cooperation between the Danish MFA and the Danish National Youth Council on the youth delegate program, and how we structure it and how we bring youth delegates into the delegations. So that was definitely a very good, place to start being a youth delegate, because it brought me in close connection with the MFA and gave me the network to reach out. I mean, in terms of, I don't know if I couldn't remember if everyone here was youth delegates or maybe had an interest, or, I mean, becoming a UN youth delegate is a really, really, truly unique experience, especially, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have been part of a very strong program from the Danish side, where we really get to do a lot, and we get to speak with ministers, we get to present our points, we get to speak on behalf of Denmark, we get to negotiate resolutions. So in that sense, there's also been an enormous development in the Danish program, and it's also something that the Danish MFA has learned along the way. We start one place and then we keep developing on how we engage young people. And as Martin mentioned earlier, it's been a key priority for Denmark for quite some time. Doing development with, by, and for young people is a key principle in our work. And luckily that also is a very clear reflection in our UN work, and also because we have an ambassador like Martin, who's really taken the agenda to heart, and is a champion of young people in the daily UN work. Maybe in terms, let me just wrap up, because we can also do a lot of questions and aspects later on, but how can young people make their voices heard at a global level or in institutions? Well, isn't that the question of the century in terms of how you work the system? I think it's quite important to point out that there's momentum now. There's been momentum for quite a few years now, 5-6 years in the UN specifically on the youth agenda, and bringing on board youth perspectives. But the key point here is how do we ensure meaningful youth engagement? Because tokenism is still a thing, remembering young people at the end of a process is still a thing. But ensuring meaningful youth engagement is ensuring that it's an integral part of the process. It has to be thought in from the very beginning. It cannot just be an added benefit at the very end of a process. It has to be thought in before the work even starts, because it's also, when we're talking about young people and how to meaningfully engage, we need to think about representativeness, legitimacy, accountability. There are so many aspects in this that are important to keep in mind when we want to ensure meaningful youth engagement in these structures. But I mean, as I mentioned, I think quite early on, I mean, I've always been a firm believer of the system in the sense that, not that the system is perfect in any way. I think the system, whether that be the UN or any other institution, I think they've shown that multiple times that they're not perfect. But I've always been a firm believer that if you want to change something, if you want to impact something, then you have to do it within or as part of the system, push change from within, because I think that's really where you can make things happen. And I think you have a chance, an opportunity to do that as a UN Youth Delegate. And as a young people, if you're organized, if you're structured in your approach, I think that's key, whether that's on individual level or it's organizational level, network level. There's so many avenues and opportunities to actually engage with the system and push. Part of it is being prepared. In my opinion, we're still at a place where if you as a young person actually get a seat at the table, you just have to be twice as prepared as anyone else in the room, because the fact that you got the seat, or maybe two of you got the seat in the room, means that you actually represent quite a lot more people, quite a lot more young people, and you have to leave, and again, this is my personal opinion, you have to leave that positive impression that you know stuff, that you actually have things to contribute with, that you have opinions, aspects, and nuances that are important to the work, because that leaves an impression and that leaves an impact that can hopefully kind of multiply further on. Yeah, and lastly, I mean, it's about networking and working together. Again, being that on individual, network, organizational level, figure out who else is interested in doing what you're doing. How can you work together? I mean, this network is quite a good example of that. Become organized and work together to create change in the system. And I mean, this is obviously a very simplified explanation of how to do it, because is it easy? No, it's definitely not. But is it easier if you work together? For sure. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natasha, for your remarks. A lot of notes to take from your speech, from your briefing, and to reflect on for our work. I think we will greatly benefit from that. A matter of tokenism, I believe, is a challenge, but young people are occupying a very unique position in the middle out, where they have access and influence at the very bottom and local level by working with young people and youth activists, and also having a voice at the top level. So our network, and we as a group of former and current youth delegates, we are in the middle out, where we try to listen in at the bottom level, on the ground, to young people, and also to speak up at the top level to ensure that that we can bridge the gap between youth activists at the bottom level and policymakers and decision makers at the very top level. And this is one of the purposes of our talk, Youth and Diplomacy Talks. We now enter our second segment, which is a moderated discussion, where I will ask a few more questions to our guest speaker, Ambassador Herman, and then we will have an open Q&A. Ambassador, what do you think are the top 3 challenges for the United Nations in 2020-22, beside military takeovers and COVID-19? What are the top 3 challenges that you think the United Nations is trying hard to deal with?
That's really tough, no? I think lack of trust. I think lack of trust between countries, between governments, and I suppose also between peoples. I mean, not individuals, but between peoples. No? I think it's a real challenge, no? Because if we are to resolve some of the challenges that we have, we need to also trust each other. No? So there needs to be an element of trust, because the United Nations, apart from the Security Council, and let's not spend time discussing how that's working these days, but United Nations is based on voluntary agreement. No? United Nations works best when we see eye to eye on things, when we can listen to each other, when we can actually try and find common ground. You know? So I think the ebb, no, the low water level in this pond of trust is a really serious concern, and we need to look at how we can increase trust. Second, I think lack of creativity. And then I come to this thing about engaging other stakeholders. No, UN is I've always thought it was very interesting. The UN, the charter starts with "we the peoples," no, but let's be honest, it's "we the governments." And we can try and change this. We can try and tweak this. We can try and do all kinds of things to make this better. But I think in 21st century, we need to do better at turning United Nations into "we the peoples," while at the same time retaining sort of the legitimacy of the actors here. For me, that's quite crucial, is that we have come to an era where the monopoly of states or the monopoly of governments is over. We still have a primacy of government and nation states, but their monopoly is over. So we need to engage other stakeholders, and we need creativity to do that. And related to those things, I suppose if there was one thing I would wish for the world, it was a stronger explicit recognition of what I would call our togetherness. No, that never before have we been more together than we are today, and we need to spend time and effort in building up trust, in trusting each other, in understanding and appreciating that despite our differences, we are going to have to work together to resolve some of those truly cross-border challenges, whether it's about handling a pandemic, whether it's about handling climate change, whether it is about, let's say, regulating the virtual world, no? One that is almost totally absent of any governance structures. No? So trust, creativity, and a realization of our togetherness. Off the cuff, no? I hadn't prepared this actually. So, ask me 10 minutes later, it might be 3 different ones.
No, I strongly agree with you on that, mainly on the creativity side. Young people like to be creative, and I think they are creative despite a lot of challenges. My second question is about the way the United Nations as a global organization functions, and the way people see this global organization in their daily life, and in the challenges that they are facing. There are a lot of expectations. I understand some of those expectations might not be realistic or closely relevant to the UN Charter, but as a youth activist, I think we see most of the time that the United Nations responds to crises than trying to prevent crises from happening. And I think it's a lack of action, and the cost of inaction and the cost of responding to crises is always more than the cost of preventing it. Do you think that is because of power struggle within the United Nations? Is it because of a trust deficit that you mentioned? Why the United Nations, for example, the United Nations Security Council, cannot prevent crises from happening before those crises become full-scale disasters like the one in Afghanistan?
Oh, big question. Well, first, I think it's important to recognize that the Security Council does actually work. It doesn't work as well as we think it should, but it does actually work. No, so United Nations was created to prevent us from the scourge of war. No, and you just have to recognize there has not been a World War III. No, so the permanent members of the Security Council have not been in direct military conflict, and knock on wood, no, and that's held for 75 years. That's not a bad feat. No? And the Security Council continues to renew mandates of really important peacekeeping operations. They may not be resolving conflict. They may not always be a terrible amount of peace to keep, but they are saving lives. That you cannot argue with. Well, I agree it doesn't work as well as it ought to. it's also the United Nations that brings humanitarian aid to hundreds of millions of people. But I fully agree with what you said. We need to be much, much better at preventing these things from occurring, and we need to be much better at resolving them when they do occur. Now, I do think that it's important to recognize that, for instance, with the Peace Building Commission, you've actually been able to move part of the agenda about prevention of conflict. You've actually tried, and you have to some extent managed to create a fora where countries can go and get help without necessarily ending up on the agenda of the Security Council. No, to address tensions and challenges and try to prevent conflict from spreading. But there is also a fundamental challenge around sort of prevention activities, that of course there is a constant ongoing discussions about intervention and sovereignty. And I think it's important that we try and get a more holistic perspective on these things, and actually appreciate that actually the ultimate prevention mechanism for conflict and for violent conflict, for military conflict, is Agenda 2030. Is actually advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. No? And we need to recognize that actually that's the ultimate prevention lens, because you're absolutely right. Preventing violent conflict, preventing humanitarian crisis is much, much cheaper. First and foremost, cheaper in terms of human suffering. And secondly, also in terms of financial resources, or just, let's say, international capacity. Because it's sometimes a totally forgotten thing is that you know, handling humanitarian crises, of course, has tremendous human suffering involved. It costs an awful amount of money, but it also draws on what is let's say, a limited amount of its national humanitarian capacity that tends to be dragged down for years in protracted crisis situations. So you're absolutely right. We need more investments in prevention. This is the best possible investment you can do, and it's worth noting that actually this features also quite prominently in the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, in his new agenda for peace, amongst other things, also increasing the amount of resources that the Peace Building Fund has available. Very, very long answer to a very short question, but that's what you get with the UN diplomat.
Thank you, Ambassador. My last question before we go to the open Q&A is that when do you think the United Nations will have a female Secretary General?
Soon, I hope. You know what, I'll tell you a story. I think we have a fantastic Secretary General. Denmark is a strong supporter of Antonio Guterres. I think he set a very ambitious program. Actually, I think the only thing that's wrong with Antonio Guterres is his gender. But no, jokes aside, I think it's extremely important, no, that United Nations, at the top management of United Nations, also reflects the diversity of the world. And of course, it's high time that we get a female Secretary General. And I actually think Antonio Guterres thinks the same time. Now let him complete his second term. He's just started. We have an awful lot of things to do, but I think why not next time? Would be obvious. I'll tell you a story. Here at the Danish mission in New York, we have not only, of course, our offices and the sort of open office space. We also have a number of meeting rooms. They're all named after big UN figures. We have a meeting room called Bodil, named after the first chair of the Commission on the Status of Women, which was a Danish diplomat. Bodil Bejtrup, who also happened to be the first ever female Danish ambassador. You know, Bodil Bejtrup was, by the way, the one responsible for making sure that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not talk about all men, but all human beings. Imagine that, no? That 75 years ago, you actually had somebody who had to say, no, we cannot have a declaration that talks about all men, but all human beings. So we have one named Bodil. We have another one named Eleanor, after Eleanor Roosevelt, which of course is the mother of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We of course have one meeting room that's called Dag, named after Dag Hammarskjöld, the Swedish Secretary General, and one, of course, we had to do that also, one named Trygve, after Trygve Lie, the first Secretary General of the United Nations, who was a Norwegian. Then we have one named Kofi, after Kofi Annan, one of the greatest Secretary General this organization has said. And then we have a meeting room which has a placeholder name. You know, placeholders, that's what we use sort of in UN negotiating. We have sort of these square brackets, and it's called Madam SG. It's waiting for a name. So we have a meeting room that has not been named. It just has waiting for the name of the first female secretary general. So about time.
That's wonderful. Well, we have Natasha here, and she has got a long career. But we hope that we are not going to wait until Natasha is an old, I would say, a diplomat with 20 years of career. I hope that we will have a female Secretary General sooner. The sooner, the better.
I think Natasha would make an excellent second female secretary general.
Or third, maybe.
You know,
The more female Secretary General we have, the better.
In 20-30 years time, it will be WEAC's time again. So Natasha can be a candidate.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador, for answering my questions. Our first question in the Q&A is from Isma. All of you, if you have questions, please send me your questions in the chat. I also have questions from the registration form that I will ask later. Isma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador, and also thank you, Natasha, for your sincere experience sharing and all the remarks. I was just listening to you that you mentioned peace building and reconciliation and conflict prevention measures and how resources should be spent. And I keep thinking about this because my country is one of the ones that is affected by a conflict. And there is obviously international funding for reconciliation, for peace building, and also for peace building education, a little bit at least, and for this promoting peace culture and so on. But the issue is what I was always, and I keep thinking about, is that it's always easier to teach the weaker side to be more tolerant, to be more accepting. But what about the larger countries that really contribute largely to all the conflicts, to all the wars that even happen beyond their borders? My question is, I mean, don't you think that maybe it's much more efficient to actually try and promote peace in those countries? Because today we have countries that ratify UN conventions and speak about human rights, at least on a declarative level, but then they have war propaganda in their schools and glorifying different invasive actions that they have done in the past history. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on this. How can maybe the international community promote peace and peace education in these countries that are the most aggressive, I would say? Thank you very much.
Wow, that's a big question also. Thanks, Esma. No, I think you're right, and I think it returns me to this sort of issue of trust, no, and the need also to look a little bit about how we interact, for instance, also on social media, no, how we use new technology, how we have, and I know this almost makes me sound sort of very, very old, no, where social media has become so effective in terms of portraying viewpoints and opinions that sometimes facts, no, seems to be forgotten, that any viewpoint is as good as the next one. But then any fact is, you can have your own facts, no, but it doesn't quite work like that. I think there needs to be sort of a long haul effort on this and trying to increase trust. And I think actually your generation and the fact that you are increasingly also connected across borders, I think can play a crucial role in this, that you create sort of a movement of young voices, no, that wants to come together, that wants to work together, no, that finds strength in the fact that actually there's a lot of you out there, because social media tends to be dominated by, or can easily be dominated by, very few people that may seem many because they shout the loudest. So I think there is something new. And then when it comes to big countries, you know what? I think big countries should follow the rules just like small countries. I think sometimes small countries have a tendency to underestimate how powerful we are if we stick together. And I think part of the conversation at the United Nations these days is also among small countries about the need for international law, adhering to international law, about an international rules-based order, about the fact that multilateralism and United Nations is just not something you have out of convenience or when it's convenient. It's a necessity. No? It is what allows countries to prosper and develop and to grow without actually fear of bigger countries, standing on their doorsteps, threatening to do nasty things to them. So I think smaller countries and medium need to stand together and emphasize that actually these rules, these laws, I mean, they're not for fun. No? They're not just when it's convenient to adhere to them. They're here because we agreed on them, and young countries need to stick together in their defense of them. Then we're much stronger than we think. That sounded almost like a politician, but I'm not.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have another question. And the question is from Idris Momand. So he has sent us two questions. His first question is, what is the most difficult part being a diplomat? He's written an ambassador. I would add to that a diplomat. The second question is, the Secretary General announced that the UN has plans to reach over 22 million people in need in Afghanistan, but have only received 90% of the funds required. What is Denmark's contribution to the crisis in that 9%, and also future plans? So I would repeat the question. Is that the Secretary General announced that the UN will reach over 22 million people needed in Afghanistan, but also received 9% of the funds required. What is Denmark's contribution to the Afghanistan crisis in that 90% fund that is required to address the humanitarian crisis?
I'm an economist by education, so I ought to be good with numbers, but I cannot remember the exact figure. What I do know is that Denmark has been a strong partner of Afghanistan for years, and we continue to be a strong partner of the people of Afghanistan. And we have contributed extremely generously last year, and I'm sure we will do the same this year, to meeting the humanitarian needs of the Afghan people. I have myself visited Afghanistan several times, and I can't help think that it's a people whose amazing resilience are being tested way too often. So and yeah, so no, I mean, I'm absolutely certain Denmark will live up to its humanitarian responsibility and honor its friendship and partnership with the Afghan people. But I can't remember the figures. You'll find them on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Natasha, would you like to add to what was discussed so far?
Thank you so much, Rameez. I mean, I know, not really. I think Martin gave some pretty good answers, and also, him being the UN ambassador, he has the more specific insight to all the dynamics. But I mean, just to echo, we've had a long-standing partnership with Afghanistan, and our focus right now is definitely on supporting the Afghan people. We also have a very people-centered approach to development and humanitarian work, and that I think has become really clear and defined in the situation around Afghanistan currently.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us. We're almost at the end of our Youth and Diplomacy Talks session for today. As I mentioned before, we have had 7 youth in diplomacy talks before this with the ambassador of Georgia, Canada, Israel, Ukraine, Slovakia, the Netherlands, and Antigua and Barbuda. In our network, we have different projects. One of the initiatives under our network was an open letter to the UN Secretary General after the crisis in Afghanistan, in which we called for the protection of youth and children in Afghanistan. Our letter was signed by 150 human rights activists and endorsed by 20 organizations globally. As Natasha mentioned, working together and mobilizing people for a common cause is not easy. It is not a quick fix, but it absolutely is what we need. My colleague Isma has her hand raised. Isma, would you like to add? Please continue. The floor is yours.
I wanted to ask another question. I'm not sure, do we have hour and a half or 1 hour? I mean, if we don't have time, that's okay, but.
Ambassador, can we take more questions? Great. Isma, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just really wondering because there are quite a few wealthy states that have a lot of resources, but unfortunately, unlike I would say the European countries, they're not so eager to invest their money in different aid projects, especially when it comes to youth empowerment and generally speaking to empowerment of the marginalized groups, including women, persons with disabilities, and so on. And we all know that the UN always is experiencing the money deficits. At least this is what I keep hearing from different UN staff members, and that they are always looking for funding to be able to support people, let's say, and have this people-centered approach. So my question is, how can bilateral relationships, how can individual countries push other states that do have money and do have economic capacity to actually invest this money in people, in equality, and promoting human rights and inclusion, generally speaking? Thank you very much.
Good question, Esma. I think, listen, Denmark has for more than 40 years lived up to the UN target of providing at least 0.7% of our wealth as development assistance or humanitarian assistance to countries in need. And I can assure you that we do use that also as a platform on which to argue that others ought to do the same. Now, this group of countries that actually delivers on this is unfortunately a very, very exclusive group of only, I think, currently 6 countries. And so we need to be much more. But I also think it's important, Esma, we need to recognize that, development assistance and grants, alone will not cut it. And then I return to this issue about trying to, cultivate partnerships. Whether it's partnerships with the private sector or with other types of things, because what we need is more interaction across sectors, but also across borders. Denmark's a small country. I think it's a very generous country. We have a number of bilateral partnerships with countries both in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Asia, and Latin America. So we have focused on a number of countries where we try to do some of the things that you're talking about. But we continue to argue also in the UN, but actually also at the European Union level, that others need to follow suit. You spoke a little bit about the UN's financial crisis. I think you're absolutely right. And what's interesting is that this is not just about voluntary funding. This is actually about what's called assessed contributions. Those membership fees that we have actually all agreed on. Only 50 countries pay what they have to pay on time and in full, and that's out of almost 200 now. So the UN, is in a difficult place, and to some extent, it's sometimes because we treat this as an a la carte restaurant, but we're not ready to pay the bill. Denmark's trying together with countries across the world to try and see what we can do also in helping countries pay on time and in full, because I think you're right. I think we all have a strong interest in actually seeing a UN that's properly resourced. No? So we'll continue to argue the good cause. I fear sometimes more than arguments are needed. I think we need private sector engaged. I think we need you engaged. Put pressure in capitals around the world on the need to not only talk about solidarity, but actually also show it in action.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you so much, Esma. Thank you, all of you, for your time and for your participation in our Youth in Diplomacy talks. Thank you so much to our guest speaker, Natasha. Natasha, I know that you're just back from your trip from Ethiopia, but thank you for your remarks and for your time. This is the end of our 8th Youth in Diplomacy talks. Please follow our Facebook page, follow our work, and we will soon share information about our next Youth in Diplomacy talks that all of you can join. You all have a wonderful day and wonderful weekend ahead. Thank you.